Taryn.
I'm going to move on. Let's take a question now from Vish. Vish Mehra. There you are.
Given record rainfall in the UK and now floods in Dubai, what do we need to do to combat climate change?
Right. Well, Carla, let's start with you.
Yeah, the news has been full of pretty alarming evidence that climate change is not a concern that is going to come down the track at some point in the future. It is here right now. And the best time that we could have brought in the policies to tackle this was, of course, decades ago. We've known about climate change my whole life. Successive governments in the UK and internationally largely failed to do that. So the second best time to do it is right now. And that's why I joined the Green Party. It's why I'm standing for election to be an MP in my home city of Bristol, because I recognised, you know, I'm an engineer by background. I didn't want to be a politician. I'm in this because I realised that the people in power making the decisions were not making the right decisions to tackle this crisis. And so I'm trying to get elected so that there can be a few more Greens in Westminster to pull whoever forms the next government in the right direction, to make sure we have the right policies on everything from renewable energy to insulating people's homes so that everyone has a low carbon but also, you know, cheap to heat and warm and comfortable home. The thing is, the technology, you know, I know as an engineer that the technology is pretty much there. The technology isn't the barrier. The barrier is the policies and the political will, and we can do something about that with how we vote.
Well, I mean, at the moment there's one Green MP, Caroline Lucas, who will be standing down, so you are hoping to become an MP at the general election. We have got a government where Greens are in a coalition with the government. That's the Scottish government, and only today they announced they are scrapping a target reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2030. Now that is where the Greens have actually got some say, and it's not working.
So first of all, the Scottish Greens are an independent party from the Green Party of England and Wales. So
sure, but they have got
Green.
do
have them on too.
I get that, but nonetheless, they have got Green in their name, and their raison d'etre is to combat climate change, and it's not working.
I was just about to say, yep. Of course, although they're an independent party, we are supportive of what they've already achieved in Scottish Government and supportive of their plans as well. So the announcement today was changing the way the targets will be done towards multi-year targets, recognising that the policies that tackle climate change don't tend to take effect in terms of reduced emissions within a single year. So
okay, well, that's one way of putting it. Another way of putting it is acknowledging the fact that they're just not going to make it by 2030 by reducing it by, was it 80%, I think, so they've had to reduce their ambition, not just the Greens, obviously the SNP as well.
Yes, and it is, you know, the Greens are the junior partner there, so they don't have complete control over what the Scottish Government have done. But the Scottish Greens in government have achieved great improvements in terms of decarbonisation in the few years that they have been in government. So the Climate Change Committee, who are the ones that produced a report saying that unfortunately this interim target is going to be missed, that report specifically highlighted the work of one of the Scottish Greens ministers, Patrick Harvey, for the work he's done on decarbonising people's homes through housing installation and installing heat pumps. They pointed to that as an example of good practice and said that the other Scottish ministers should learn from that and how they can decarbonise in their portfolios. So yes, it's a huge point of regret that for the Scottish Greens, and I think for the whole of the UK, that the interim target for 2030 is no longer achievable. However, the final target of the Scottish Government, which is net zero by 2045, is still achievable. And I think especially with the policies that the Scottish Government have announced today around tackling the harder to decarbonise sectors like agriculture and transport, with some really good policies about making public transport better and retargeting subsidies that farmers receive towards helping them to do more climate and nature-friendly farming, that will get us on the right course. And I think that, frankly, the UK Government could stand to learn a lot from what the Scottish Government are doing on this.
So, Richard, the question is, what do we need to do to combat climate change?
Yeah, and look, we all care about the environment, but the climate has changed for millions and millions of years. That's the reality, way before man-made CO2 emissions. And
so let's just be clear. Are you denying that climate change has changed exponentially quickly in relatively recent years because
the climate
of
has
man-made
always changed, and if we look at the IPCC...
So no, hang on, so answer my question.
Sorry.
The question is, are you saying that this is just a natural course of events and that man has nothing to do with it?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, yes, we've had man-made CO2 emissions for about 200 years, and there's no question that's contributed towards it. But there's no evidence at all that if you get to net zero CO2 emissions, that all of a sudden the power of the sun, the power of the sea, the power of volcanic activity is going to stop. I mean, the IPCC itself, Carla, says that if you get to net zero literally tomorrow, sea level rise will continue for how long?
Richard,
Between 200 and 1,000 years. So the better thing to do is to adapt to the changing climate. That is the smart thing to do, and it's a lot less costly than the current route to get to net zero, where there's no evidence it will stop climate change.
Richard,
And the countries that are going to be underwater, how do they adapt?
No one's going to be able to. So let's take an example, Carol. Let's take an example of the Maldives that we were told would sink underwater. The Maldives now is 35 square kilometres bigger than it was 30 to 40 years ago. It's about adaptation. Where you're worried about sea level defences and flooding, you build the defences. That's the smart thing to do, and it's a great deal less costly than trying to stop the power of the sun, which you clearly can't do. So you've got to be smart about this, adapt to climate change.
It might kill their tourism industry. I hate to say it, the Maldives. Just only put defences around the beaches, but just a thought.
It's called reclamation, and they've built some extra land, and they've reclaimed land, and you've had siltation. That's how it happened. So you've got to adapt to climate change as opposed to thinking you can stop it.
can I ask Richard a question? What's your science background? What makes you think that you understand how climate change works better than all of the world's scientific experts combined?
There are plenty of scientists who believe that climate change has always gone on and always will, and don't think that net zero will stop. Where is the evidence that if you get to zero CO2 emissions, climate change will stop?
Well, it's
the
right
IPCC
there.
doesn't think it will.
It's an overwhelming majority of all the world's experts on climate science understand.
I think what they're saying is it's going to get worse, Richard. I think that's the point. They're saying it's going to get worse, and then how will we cope with it? Tell me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
Well, the IPCC says that sea level rise will not stop for over 200 years.
But
so we're
do you
better to
understand
adapt
why that is? That's because the the carbon that's already going into the atmosphere will continue to have an effect for hundreds of years. It's not that going to net zero doesn't have a benefit.
So we're better to adapt to it and build the defences rather than think that we can stop it.
You've made your point. Let's hear from the audience. Yes, the woman there.
Yeah, the government haven't got a grip on any of this. We have an electric car. We head up into the Peak District. It immediately flashes up. Charge your car. No charging points found in the locality. So that's one thing. Our son has the hydrogen heating system and cannot get anybody to repair it. They have to travel 50 miles. That's the nearest person that will repair. The solar heating, solar panels, they could put them on all the supermarkets, we could put them everywhere, but the government are allowing great big farms, the farmers' fields to be covered with them to make money for business and corporations. So the government just have not got a grip on anything to do with climate change. Plenty of other examples, that's just three.
OK, I'll let you respond. I'm just going to come around the audience a bit more. Yes, woman there in the glasses.
Unfortunately, one of the reasons why this country can't afford the green policies that we would really like is actually following Brexit, we have a 4% drop in our GDPR, and the country is much poorer following Brexit.
OK, Richard, I know you are gagging to come in on that, but just to keep it on climate, I will keep on that if I may. Yes, the man at the back, I think you've got a red shirt on, yeah.
As an island nation with about 8,000 miles of coastline, why aren't we generating more from tidal?
Why don't we generate more from tidal power? OK, and at the very back. Yeah.
I think, to be quite honest with you, well, we've still got people such as Richard in this country that even refuse to acknowledge that climate change is happening due to our own...
That's not what I said, sir. I said it's been happening for millions of years. Come on.
Well, no, because, quite frankly, human activity is a direct reason why climate change is occurring on the level that it is. And because you're refusing to acknowledge that, we won't get to the point and we won't find a solution. And until we find a solution, honestly, you know, you can relocate Westminster because London will be underwater, as will Liverpool and as will most of the cities where people live.
David. What do we need, given that record rainfall in the UK, and my God, we are fed up of the rain, aren't we? And the floods, extraordinary floods in Dubai we've seen, which can't be linked necessarily specifically and solely to climate change, but nonetheless it's accepted that climate change exacerbates the likelihood of such things occurring. What do we need to do to combat climate?
Well, for most of the technologies that we'll need to adopt, we're going to need very large amounts of electricity, which is why I'm staggered that Carla and the Green Party are not supportive of nuclear power, because that actually is the only way that will ever generate enough electricity to solve some of the problems through the technology, such as the lady was talking about, electric cars that need to be able to make hydrogen through electrolysis in order to run HGVs, the heat pumps, the ground source, air source heat pumps. We need a lot of electricity for this, a lot more than we've got at the moment. So we need nuclear power. That's the first thing. We can also build on what we've got using offshore wind, floating offshore wind, which is an emerging technology. And we're doing that. There's been a huge increase in the amount of renewable energy that is used to generate electricity under this government. But, you know, we're going to continue to need gas and oil for the time being, and that's why it's so important that we continue to extract oil and gas from the North Sea. And I'm afraid, you know, once again, British probably not going to like me pointing out what Labour's policy is, but your policy is to stop taking oil and gas out of the North Sea, not to renew the licences, which is going to cost at least 100,000 jobs. And mean that we become more reliant on foreign countries for the oil and gas that we're going to continue to need for the next couple of decades. And I'm afraid I know you don't like it.
I mean, that oil and gas is going to be sold on the open market. Well, other countries will be in a queue.
Yeah, but the gas doesn't. The gas goes into the pipelines in the UK, right? Because gas isn't that portable. The only way to move gas around is to condense it into LNG and send it across the world.
Which
but again, you know, what we're not going to do under a Conservative government is what we see again in Wales under Labour, where we see no new roads being built. That's one of the policies. No new roads ever to be built
David, do you ever have anything positive to say about what your government are actually
Bridget,
doing?
I'm just pointing out what your government are doing. We can talk about my government. I've just spoken about it, but no new roads ever to be built again. Taking 20% of agricultural land, 20% of agricultural land is being taken aside. Can I just finish, Bridget? Sorry if I know you don't like people interrupting. I don't like it either. 20% of farmland in Wales is being taken aside and used for planting trees and wildlife schemes. And you've just brought in legislation to allow road tolling on the motorways. So that is the blueprint that you have for the rest of the United Kingdom. And if we can't even grow our own food because the land is covered with trees and wildlife schemes, we're not going to be able to solve the issue of food security either.
Right. I'll come back a step and just go back to the question where we began. Climate change is a really big challenge that we face as a country and a challenge that all of us face internationally. I do worry that it feels often so overwhelming, the scale of what we're facing, that we do then have to focus on the changes that we can make and the role for government in delivering that. And I do think to the point about jobs and skills and what we need to do, there is a really big opportunity for us as a nation to deliver lots of really well-paid, highly skilled jobs on the basis of those new technologies, including in communities that would really benefit from that additional investment. That's why Labour's plan around our Green Prosperity Plan is about our country being at the forefront of those jobs, those technologies, and the shift that we need to see. And alongside
but clearly spending less on it than you were going to originally. It was going to be a 28-year, £1 billion a year investment. Now it's not going to be anything like that.
Well, sadly, after Liz Truss came along, the economy is in a total mess and we can't go as fast as we would like. That's the sad reality of it. However, I do think this is a really big opportunity for us as a nation, but it's also a way by which we can cut people's gas and electricity bills too, and how we can make sure that we are energy independent, that we are not so dependent on the import of energy, where we've been so exposed in recent times because of the war in Ukraine. Had we invested over the course of the last decade in homegrown energy, in renewable technology, not only would we have more jobs, people's bills would be a lot lower.
All right, listen, I know you want to go backwards and forwards. I'm going to stop you because we've got, how long have we got left? 6 minutes, something like that. And I want to take this last question because lots of you asked about it. So I'll ask you to respond to the question and be brief so I can hear from the audience as well. Dan.